Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to be using Plasticity and xNurbs to create a 3D mouse. Now, I've had a lot of comments and questions asking for us to do a 3D mouse. It seems to be a pretty popular thing that people want to model, and we've also had a lot of questions or comments talking about xNurbs or doing more surfacing work. So in this video, hopefully we'll hit both of those topics. We're not going to do a fully detailed model just because it takes a good bit of time, but we are going to be creating this base shape. So we're talking about the way that we can import the empties or those blueprint images, the way we can set them up, and the way we start building out our curve network. Now, the more images, or if you actually happen to have a 3D model of something or a physical version of it, the more references that you have, the easier this process becomes. We are not going to have those references because not everybody's going to have the same mouse. So the first thing that we're going to do is check the link in the description. There's a link to the Logitech website, and Logitech has a lot of good views of their mice, and I picked a fairly simple one. This is the Signature M550. Now, I don't have this mouse. I actually use an MX vertical mouse, but this is a pretty common mouse shape. And the reason I like this is because it has a good top view and it has a good side view. So we will have enough information that we can start to build out this shape and build out the curvature. So the first thing that I suggest is getting some screenshots of a side view and a top view. So that way we can bring those directly into Plasticity. And then keeping this website open on another monitor off to the side, so that way you can take a look at it and reference it, and we can get a better idea of where those curves are. If you really want to, you can also bring in a bottom view. I'm not going to for our example, because really once you understand how to build these curves in 3D, you'll have a much easier time. I would suggest that you use the black version of this rather than the white version, simply because it's white on white, and when we put that in Plasticity, it's going to be much harder for us to see those curves. So when we get the black version of this, if you just take a screenshot of this picture, then what you'll be able to do is you'll have just a better time of seeing those images. So with all that said, let's go ahead and let's hop into a new file of Plasticity, and we're going to get rid of the cube. So make sure that any settings that you may have changed, you do go back, make sure you're showing the edges, make sure that your units and your grid size and all that is good for what you are doing. We're not going to worry too much about units in this video, but just make sure that it's set up how you like to model. And note that I've got all my selection filters currently on. Now, if you're new to Plasticity and you're not sort of comfortable or familiar with shortcut keys, make sure that you do spend some time learning the basics first, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the different shortcuts. We are going to use a handful of shortcuts. Things that are fairly common in this video will be join, where we join curves together. We are going to be using the xNurbs tool, but we can use the F key and find a lot of these things. But just make sure that you're comfortable with moving, rotating around, and doing some of the basic commands in here. So the first thing that we're going to do is delete the cube. And because I'm using the metric unit system here, specifically millimeters, the grid size is tiny. So I'm going to hit the /, which will bring that into view. And then I'm going to start by going up to the file menu and selecting import append. Now I already have a side view here. Like you can see that I've downloaded, or I've created a side and a top view. So I'm going to grab the side view. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to rotate it. So R on the keyboard. And looking at the coordinate system, we're going to rotate it about X in this case. So hit X, 90, and enter twice. Next thing I want to do, I want to actually get this to be my side view, which is 3 on the keyboard. And you can see right now that right view, or the side view, isn't showing it. So I need to rotate it about Z. So again, R, Z, 90, and hit enter. The next thing I'm going to do is hit 3 on my numpad to go to this side view. And I want to see what scale this thing is. So it's hard to tell, but it's pretty small. So when I take a line and I just draw a line from left to right, it's coming in at about 10 millimeters. In reality, the mouse should be about 100 millimeters, or about 4 inches or so. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale this up. So with it selected, we'll hit S on the keyboard, and I'm going to do a 10:1 scale. So 10, 10, 10, and hit enter twice. Then I'm going to hit the / again. And now if I draw another line, we should be at 100 millimeters roughly for the overall size. So that looks pretty good. couple more things that we want to do before we get the top view in. So we're going to move this up, so G and Z, and I'm going to move it up till the bottom is roughly on the x-axis. It doesn't have to be perfect because we are just referencing an image. And next, with it selected, I'm going to hit M on the keyboard, which is our material. And for an empty like this, the main thing that we're going to do is click on opacity, right click. And last thing that we're going to do over here is we're going to click on this lock icon. The reason that we do that is because now we're not going to be selecting this image. So if I click around the screen, I'm not going to accidentally select it. So let's go ahead and rotate our view. Go back to import append. This time I'm going to bring in the top-down view. And when we do this, you can see that it's tiny. So I have found, especially when you're looking at things like a manufacturer's website, even though we scaled the side view 10:1, it's not actually going to be the same scale here. So I'm going to hit S first, and I'm going to do a 10:1. And you can see that it's just not the same size. I do need to rotate this around. So R, Z, and 180, and hit enter and enter again. And because it's not the same size, I'm just going to hit S on the keyboard twice, which will allow me to sort of attach the cursor to the scale object, and I can just move it around. And I just want to roughly get it right. And when I say roughly get it right, what I'm looking at is this edge here roughly falls there, and this one roughly there. Again, we're just kind of using this as a reference, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you can get it, the easier your job will be. So again, materials, what we can do is we can actually take this white dot and drag it down onto this one here, and all the same options are going to apply in terms of materials, and then we can lock that one as well so we don't actually accidentally click on it. So now that we've got everything in place for us to model, it would be best if we had a front view and we had some more, again, a real 3D mouse in front of us, or if we had some more pictures or images that we could reference. But for right now, this is what we have to work with, so let's just go ahead and work with it. So on the numpad 3 to go to our right view, I like to begin laying out everything flat whenever possible. Now there are a couple of workflows that you can decide to go on. You can lay out everything flat and then you can move it in 3D, or you can just build it out flat and project curves in 3D. That's generally going to be the workflow that I use for a couple of reasons. And of course, there are other variations of these that you can do. You can start to build individual surfaces, but it kind of helps me at least visualize these curves by building it on just a right plane or a front plane first. So with the line tool, I'm just going to draw a horizontal line, right click to accept, and this is the base of the mouse. I'm not going to worry about the little rubber feet underneath it or anything like that, but this is the base, which should be flat. From here, it's important that we identify where the curvature is. And what I mean by that is there's a split line here where it's multiple pieces, but the change in curvature is actually below that split line. So there's a little bit of a change right there. And if we move on to the back, that actually ends up crossing over and coming to roughly that seam. So here's where we have to make a judgment call. And what we're going to do is we are going to assume that it goes from that point there. So I'm going to use my spline curve tool. I'm going to start from this edge. I'm going to hold down Control because I don't want any persistent snaps. And I'm just going to make a little bit of a curve here up until that point and right click to accept. And we're going to do the same thing back here. Now, if you're used to using Plasticity, Shift and R is repeat last command. So if we just go in here, you can see repeat last command is Shift plus R. So if you're using things like the spline curve over and over again, you can use that Shift and R to just keep using it. So what we're going to do here is, again, hold down Control to override persistent constraints and just make a spline, right click to accept, zoom out. Again, Shift and R will allow us to repeat that last command. And then again, hold down Control, and we're just going to do this with just a few points, and then let go of Control until we get to here, right click to accept. Now, I don't really like the way that this point is above and this point is below. It really should be a very gradual curve. So I'm going to select that vertex, hit G twice to move and bring it down, and select this one, hit G twice to bring it up, and just kind of move them around. So that looks pretty good so far. This is our bottom section. Now I need to build the upper section, and I also need to build where the sort of transition line is. Now, in reality, everything on this mouse is smooth. Nothing is going to have a really sharp edge, but we are just going to go for the basic shape. And what's going to end up happening here is we're going to just avoid this gap here where it actually allows you to click. And we're just going to build that sort of that base shape. So again, spline tool, we're going to start back here, hold down Control, and kind of work our way forward. And we're going to pick the point in space where we want this to end. So I'm going to go right there. And the reason I say that is because it actually tapers back, and then it actually tapers up a little bit close to that mouse wheel. And we're not going to worry about that curvature. So a couple of you may be thinking, why am I using the spline curve instead of the control point curve? When we're drawing on images, it's much easier for us to use the traditional spline curve, and Plasticity automatically converts that to a control point sort of Bezier curve because the control points no longer lie on the spline. So if I come in here and I'm drawing this with the points on the spline and I right click, as soon as I'm done, it transitions that to the sort of control point curve. I'm going to delete that because I don't need it. So when you're trying to match an image, if I were to use the control point curve and I started back here, I'm holding down Control. As I start to go around, you can see that I'm putting points outside of the image, which just makes it quite a bit harder. So depending on your needs, depending on your requirements, just pick one or the other is fine. But just note that after we're done with the traditional spline, that Plasticity automatically adds these external control points for us. All right, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go from here, hold down Control, put a midpoint here, let go of Control, and snap to there. So these two edges, this is going to be actually a little tricky. These two edges should not be tangent, which they're not, and they should not actually have a dip there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that point in G and Y and move it out because I want to make sure that there is a slight break. And we can figure that out. If I take a line and I start to draw the line out tangent, we want to make sure that that line is external to this here. So again, we're just going off the image, so we don't have a perfect reference here, but now we've got most of the side. The last thing that we want to do is we want to sort of get a representation of this curve here. And in reality, that curve is going to transition back to this point. We're not going to stick to it perfectly. You can see that we're a little bit above. Whenever you're dealing with a photo and it's not a true orthographic view from a computer, from an image, or from a 3D model, then there is potentially some perspective there. We have to be careful and just kind of make some judgment calls along the way. So now that we have these, we need to name them. It's going to be much easier if you do this. So we're going to pick this and double click. I'm going to call this back. Pick another one here. This is front, lower. I'm going to call this one base. This one here is my mid. This is my top. And this is my front upper. And this curve here, I'm just going to call this my button profile. It'll be much easier if we name them at this point in time. So at this stage, now we've got a couple of curves laid out. We need to really think about our next step. So I'm going to use H on the keyboard to hide this edge and H on the keyboard to hide this edge. Everything else that we see here can be used as a reference helper surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything here and select all these edges. I don't want to select the profile. I just want to select the edges. Hit E on the keyboard to extrude and pull this back. The main reason for this is because if I were to just select the profile and pull it back, I'd have a solid. And what I really want here is I want to have those references as surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and hide the empties for now. Have those references as surfaces because now I can use them to drive tangency or curvature continuity with a loft, with a patch, or with the xNurbs tool. Now, if you are looking to purchase Plasticity, just remember that we are an affiliate, so you can use the link in the description. That'll get you 10% off, and it will help out the channel. The xNurbs tool is only going to be in the studio license version. You can still do everything that we're going to do here with the loft tool if you want. There are some nuances and exceptions, differences between how some of those tools work, but we are going to use the xNurbs tool because it does give a little bit better surfaces in most cases, not all cases, some cases they're identical. Keep in mind that if you are using the loft tool that you want to make sure everything stays connected. Your loft guides and your rails have to have continuity with each other. So that's something that the xNurbs tool can kind of get around. Okay, so now we've got these really the only curves that we have, the mid curve here and the button profile. These are the two curves that are left and they're not helper surfaces. So what we need to do now is we need to start to build out the shape. And generally what I do is I try to build out major surfaces first and then work backwards and do minor surfaces. And what I mean by major or minor, or maybe primary, secondary might be better. Major surfaces are ones that are going to define the overall shape. So the top of this, where your hand rests, that's a big driving shape. And we need to make sure that that's right and that's nice and smooth. So I'm going to start there. In order to do that, this curve needs to end up in 3D. So in order for that to happen, because this midline is also a primary curve or driving shape here, I want to build this curve out in 3D. So for that, I'm going to hide our mid curve, so H on the keyboard, and I need to figure out where this curve is. Now, this is where it gets tricky not having a 3D model because part of it disappears here. The other thing that makes this tricky is we have to be mindful of tangency at the midplane. And the reason for that is because when we mirror this across, we need to make sure there's not a seam there. So the way that I like to do this is I like to generally build part of the surface or part of the curve here. So again, hold down Control. And just from looking at pictures on the website, I know that this sort of comes back out and works its way back in. And I'm going to end it there. Now, the reason I ended it there is because it needs to come back to this point. And you can see I've already gone a bit too far forward. So if I were to take a line, so Shift and A, and just kind of draw that line out, basically what needs to happen is this curve needs to come all the way to here and be tangent at that point. The way that I like to do this is by using the bridge curve tool. I'm going to go from here to here, and it tends to jump around. So when you're on a curve, hold down Shift. We're going to switch this to G1 continuity on both sides, which is tangency. And by default, it'll trim so that entire straight line will disappear as long as this value here is set to 0. So if it's anywhere above 0, you can see that it's leaving part of that straight line, which may be fine for your design, but we want to take it all the way to 0. Right click to accept. With those both selected, I'm going to hit J on the keyboard to join them together. The next thing that we need to do is repeat that process on the back side. This is going to get kind of hard to see, but let's go ahead and try this. The thing that we have to be careful with on the back side is what we're doing is we're building out two curves that are going to be projected. If I were to just use the bridge curve from here to say up to here, and don't worry about following along for this part. I just want to show you what happens. What ends up happening is it's building that up in 3D. It might work okay for a projected curve, but honestly, that's not really what we're trying to do here. So I don't want to do that. I want to build it out flat on sort of the top plane. So there are a couple ways that we can do this. I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to select this back edge and hit Shift D, then right click. And what I did was I duplicated that. Now, there's a couple of other ways that we can do this. Again, from the top view, if I do Alt D, which is an alternate duplicate, notice that it pushes it down to that top plane, the plane that we were looking at when we were sketching. If we didn't have that option, what you could do is you could take that edge that we just duplicated and you can scale it. So S on the keyboard, and the key here is the pivot point. So we're going to use V on the keyboard and put that pivot point at the origin. And then notice that the green axis is pointing up. So we're going to say Y, 0. And what that's going to do is it's going to scale it to our coordinate system, our pivot point. And if we put it at 0, it'll push it all the way down. So we're essentially scaling it in plane. Now I'm going to escape because I don't need to do that in this case, but I wanted to show you at least a couple of options. Let's go ahead and hide the empties to make this maybe a little bit easier to see. And once again, we're going to do bridge curve. I'll go from here, and in this case, I'm going to attach it to here. G1 continuity again. In this case, I just want to use tangency because this is a straight edge. Tangency, curves, or continuity, it's not really going to give me much of a different result. And since I didn't really spend a whole lot of time on defining these curves, tangency is going to be enough for us. So delete, and then join these together with J on the keyboard. So now we've got this one here. You can see that the bridge ended up going up because I didn't put that down onto that top plane. But let's go ahead and try it. So shift select the other curve, F for our tool, our search tool, and start to type in curve, curve. So we want project, curve, curve. Remember that a lot of these tools, and I'm going to go ahead and go back a step. A lot of these tools, like project, there are other options like body, body, curve, curve, and so on. The project tool generally handles all of those things. So if I just hit I on the keyboard, it will work. So if you end up running into a situation where you've got a tool that you use all the time, like project, curve, curve, you just remember that the default tool, project, oftentimes will just work for that as well. So here's a problem that we have. Because of this bridge curve here, where it sort of blends up, now we've got a situation where that didn't extend all the way to this point, and it really needs to. So I'm going to hide this, and I'm going to use bridge curve. Let's pull this over so we can see it. And I'm going to go from here, hold down shift and go all the way to that edge, to there, and again G1 continuity, and then J to join. So basically that allows me to finish that off. So that was quite a bit of work to get that to happen. There are other ways that we could do this. If you really wanted to, you could drive tangency with things like lines, or if you are, I'll just go ahead and show you real quick. If you are using, let's say, the control point curve, and we tap shift, we've got this projection here, then basically what this is going to do is it's going to drive tangency inadvertently, drive tangency just for the fact that we brought those control points out. Now, the more control points you add, that's essentially how we end up getting G1, G2, G3 continuity. There are some other variables to it, like the distance between those points, but for the most part, you can manually do that if you want to. I find that bridge curve is just easier. So let's bring our empties back. At this point, that point out in space where we did the bridge, because from the top view, we started at that sort of section there. That's now a great reference point where we can snap that new curve that we want to build here. Now, remember that we already have this curve. It's called the button profile from the side. However, that button profile from the side does not attach to that point. So it's not where it needs to be. So what we want to do now is we want to make sure that we can build this in 3D, and I'm gonna sort of do it incorrectly so we can kind of work through the process of fixing it. Because this is a common problem that we end up seeing, is these points not being quite in the right spot. Now, in reality, what would be perfect or what would be better is if that and that point were in the same location as we're looking at it from the side. But again, we're going to do this kind of incorrectly so we can see how to fix it. So I'm going to start with just my basic spline curve. I'm going to snap here, which, keep in mind that this is potentially bad because it's in 3D, but I'm going to snap there, hold down control so there's no persistent constraint, kind of work my way forward. And the location that I want to end up in, I'm going to just right click because I'm going to use that bridge curve again. Now, remember that this started where I selected that point. This bridge curve is a little bit lower, but I think it'll still be okay. So I'm going to come from here, hold down shift, work my way over. Now, even though I held down shift, notice that that point ended up staying in the middle because it snapped there. All we need to do is make sure that this value here is 0. G1 continuity on both, right click, and J to join. Okay, so now shift select this one. Again, I for project, right click to accept, and then let's just hide this and hide this for now. Actually, let's go ahead and let's hide the empties as well. So because those points weren't in the same spot, this is the problem that we have. We now have a disjoint between these two. It's easy enough to fix, so all we're going to do is select that point, hit G on the keyboard twice, and then we're going to hit freestyle, so F on the keyboard. Freestyle will allow us to select the position that we're going from and the position we're going to. If this doesn't work, let's go ahead and just see if we can move this in space. Notice that as we're moving it in space, that endpoint is not moving. So I'm going to go to my point selection and try to move it around, and it's still not moving. Oftentimes when we have a projected curve, you'll notice that the curve itself can move. So if I try to just move the curve, I can move it. But the endpoints don't behave exactly like a traditional curve does because it wasn't built like a normal curve. It's just built in 3D as a projection. So what we end up needing to do is we either need to rebuild it or raise the degree of the curve. I think that rebuilding it is a better option. What that's going to allow us to do is either determine the number of points or use just a refit method with a tolerance value. Now, if you choose a number of points, by default, it'll have a large number in there. Notice that the curvature is actually changing. This is a problem at the front because remember, we're driving tangency. So I like to use the refit if I have a projected curve where I need to drive that tangency up front. But if you don't need to drive the tangency, you can always try to do the number of points, maybe unjoin that front edge and do another bridge curve. But for right now, let's just do refit, right click. And now we should be able to take this point, G, F for freestyle, start, end, and OK. So once again, that would have all been avoided had the view from our side matched the location of that point. So when we created that projected curve, it just ended up at the right spot. But because we didn't, there had to be a little bit of work by doing a refit on that curve by rebuilding it. Now that vertex is blue, which tells me that it is actually snapping to that location. So once again, a little bit of extra work, but it was something that we needed to know how to do. So there are a couple of other problems here that we need to think about. So we've got these extended curves back here. I'm going to go back to my all selection for now. We've got this extrude here that we can use to start building the shape. But the problem is this curve is one long curve. And even though xNurbs is a great tool and has a ton of flexibility, it will not really enjoy us doing that. So let's give it a shot. Let's just make sure that we're doing the right thing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, holding down Shift, all the edges that complete that border. I'm going to hit F for search and start to type in xNurbs. For my guide, I'm going to select this as a guide, and it will allow me to create this guide, but obviously that's not the shape we're looking for. Nothing here has tangency yet, so even if I were to drive tangency off of these, it just doesn't work. The way that we get around this, and I'm going to hold down Shift and go to my point selection as well. The way that we get around this is by breaking this curve up. Now we can do it a couple of different ways, but what I'm going to do is use the cut tool. So I'm going to hit F to search, and notice that we've got cut curve, which is underneath the cut tool. So again, C would work just fine here. We've got our target body, and that's going to be this edge here, and the cutting tool is going to be this here. So let's go ahead and let's hit F, and let's go ahead and use cut curve, make sure that this works, and that, right click, and you can see here. Now we got that extra little piece, shift select this, shift select that, F, xNurbs, and we want to make sure we drive this with at least tangency here. Right click, and now we've built that nice new top surface. I'm going to go back to my all selection, which is 5 on my numbers. This edge I don't need. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to hide this. I'm going to hide that. So at this point, now we want to build this surface down here. This is where your thumb is going to rest on the side of the mouse. And again, it's another one of those primary or critical surfaces. The problem that we have here is there's really nothing driving the shape. So what we're going to do is go to edge selection, and let's just select all the edges around here and see what it looks like. So F, xNurbs, and we're going to drive tangency off the front. And you can see it kind of bulges out right there. And the back, it just doesn't look right. So the way that we're going to get around this is we're going to go to a side view and we're going to build some curves. So using the spline tool, I'm going to build a curve, 3 points right there. And I'm going to build another curve back here. It can just come straight down, doesn't really matter at this point. But when we rotate this around, notice that they're not touching. So we need to go to our vertex selection or control point selection. And I'm going to take this point, G, X, and as I drag it, I'm going to hold down control and make sure that it snaps to my curve. I'm going to do the same thing here. G, X, hold down control, and let it snap to the curve. You may need to zoom in to make sure that it works, because remember, these need to turn blue. Sometimes instead of just moving it in the X direction, you can hit G twice to allow it to move freely and snap it to the curve. But what you want to see is that vertex at the end is going to turn blue. We'll do the same thing over here. GG, hold down control. Make sure that it snaps to the curve. So now these can be used as internal guides for the xNurbs surface, but we want to make sure that we drive their shape properly. So I'm going to box select those two, one on the keyboard, and just kind of move them around. So G twice, grab this one, G twice. And what I want is I want it to curve forward a little bit. Let's go ahead and move this around. And just make sure that I keep that corner kind of tight. I don't want it to bulge out. And this one back here just really needs to curve in. So we're going to go back to our edge selection, grab the entire border, F on the keyboard and xNurbs. Now we can use these as internal guides. So select one, hold down Shift to select the other. Make sure that we're driving tangency off the front. You'll notice that tangency off the front tends to bulge that out a little bit. Likely what you would want to do is play around. If we actually had one of these that we could see and hold, we'd be able to see what happens in this area. But likely you'd want to play around with a little bit of the tangency influence potentially, and possibly, work with this curve a little bit more. There are some options for quality. So you can see that if we change the quality to high, it actually pulls that corner in a little bit. If we go to auto, you can see that it's bulged out just a little bit. But overall, I think that looks okay. So let's right click and accept it. I'm going to hide these curves. Don't need them, but I don't want to get rid of them just yet. So far that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go back to my all selection and J to join those together. Now, part of the reason for that is I want to make sure that I can round this corner off properly. I want to use G2 continuity here. The reason for that is because now I'm not just dealing with straight edges or extruded edges. Now I'm dealing with curvature in 3D. And going from a conic style, which is just tangency at the edge, to G2, it's based on the curvature. Now you can also use the chordal option. Basically, this will dictate the chord length, but you are going to find restrictions, especially in this case, and I'll show you why here in just a second. Because the back is actually tangent here, the way that we did this curve, it's not going to be able to define a true chord length fillet in this area, just simply because it goes to 0 here. So in this case, that's not going to work. If that was a sharp corner, then 100% the chordal would be able to work. So let's right click to accept that. We've now got that smooth edge. I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to hide it. And now we can start building the bottom. Now, again, there is a bottom image on the Logitech website. We could use that, but I'm just going to sort of guess at it. So I'm going to hit 7 on the keyboard, which is top, but I'm going to hit Control and 7, which is bottom. And I need to go from basically this edge to this edge and build the bottom. I'm going to use a spline curve. And once again, holding down the Control key, I'm just going to kind of work with the shape that I have here. I'm trying to mimic it as best I can. And then right click to accept. And then we'll use the bridge curve tool. So we're going to go from here, hold down Shift to the end of that edge. Again, G1 continuity should be fine, but you'll notice that it's bunching up here. If that happens, then make sure that you rotate around. You can see that curve is not actually on the top plane. So once again, we're going to use our trick, S to scale. V to move our pivot point here, and then we're going to scale it in Y and hit 0 on the keyboard. So that'll put it on that top plane. Now when we use bridge curve, we'll be able to go from here, hold down Shift, G1 continuity. That looks a bit better. We'll do the same thing on the back side, bridge curve. Also, another note, if you select a vertex and another vertex, you can use the loft tool and create a tangent curve between those. When we're doing something like going from a curve to the edge of a surface, using the bridge curve tool is going to be the better way to do that. So let's shift select all three, join them together. Not really required, but it is helpful. And then I'm going to go to my edge selection, shift select here, F, and patch. Now the main reason I'm doing patch here is because it's flat, but I also want to show you something that happens with patch. So I'm going to go back to my all selection. Patch automatically is going to join the surfaces together. So if this happens, you can use Shift Delete, which will basically allow you to delete that selected face. I'm going to undo that. You can also use Alt and J, which is unjoin. If you need that surface for some reason, then you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that, hide the curve. And the last part of this is for us to connect those two together. So I'm going to go back to my edge selection. This can be done with a loft, or it could be done with the xNurbs tool. So for example, if I say loft here, the guides are going to be this edge here and shift select this edge. Notice that it automatically is going to G1. We can't have G1 continuity or even G2 continuity on these edges. Basically, it's not going to allow it to be rounded there. It needs to come from here. If you want it to be rounded and blend, then you need to do it sort of in an intermediate way. But this is what we get with the loft. I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to select everything. And we're going to do the xNurbs tool. And you can see the xNurbs tool, even though we're not driving the tangency, that it actually is giving us a more rounded profile. I'm going to drive tangency off of this edge and tangency off of that edge. And you can see that it does actually give me a different result. So again, this is one of those cases where you have to play around with the different tools and see what the results are. But the xNurbs tool gives us that sort of rounded surface. And just to kind of reiterate that, I'll go ahead and I'll make the loft again. Let's go ahead and do this. We'll loft between those. Again, this has to be G0 for the loft tool. It doesn't know what to do there. That can be G1. Hold down Shift. That can be G1. But let's take this surface and I'm just going to move it down GZ and bring back the xNurbs surface. So you can kind of see here, the xNurbs surface is rounded where the loft is really just straight from one edge to the other. So it does give you a different result, definitely something that you need to look at, but you could certainly do it with the loft. You could use some intermediate guides and play around with the shape a bit more. But just so we understand that there is a difference in some cases when you're talking about using loft versus xNurbs. Now, select all of these, J to join them together. And I am going to round this off as well, just a very small fillet. And then that entire body will mirror to the other side. Now, as soon as we mirror and join a body like this, notice it's going to go from a sheet or a surface to a solid. Anytime it's a complete watertight closed set of surfaces, it will become a solid automatically. But there is our shape. Let's go ahead and turn off the overlays. I'm going to come in here and turn off my edges. And we can see that there is no visible seam in the middle because we use those helper surfaces when we were originally driving that top surface right down the middle. So we should never see any seam or anything there. Now the sides look pretty smooth. Could potentially do some more work up here up front. You can see it kind of flattens off, so these curves could be pulled back a little bit and maybe help that shape out. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with that shape. It looks pretty good. You can also use the render mode to take a look at things like zebra stripes and make sure there isn't a jump as it goes across the middle there. We can also do that in this direction, kind of move it around, make sure everything looks nice and smooth. And of course, we can use some of the different matte caps and get a nice smooth result here. But again, we're not going to go through the full thing. Just doing this took us 40 minutes to get through and explain. So hopefully from here, it's a little bit easier to start to split the surfaces up and make some changes. If you do want to see fully detailed model or going a bit further, please let me know. I tend to err on the side of caution with some of these because they do take a good bit of time to go through and explain. But if people want to see it, then I'm happy to make that content. Now, if you have any questions on this, then please leave a comment and let me know. If you want to see more plasticity content, leave a comment as well. I try to do a good mix of plasticity and fusion and other things that we cover on the channel. If you like what you see here, please do subscribe to the channel. And once again, we are an affiliate for Plasticity. So if you are looking to purchase, you can use the link in the description and that'll get you 10% off. So as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.